Navies have, since time immemorial, been uniquely useful as instruments of statecraft. Despite this extensive history of naval diplomacy, as we might call it, the great maritime strategic thinkers who emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries and onwards had reasonably little to remark about the use of navies in peacetime. It took until 1977 and the publishing of Ken Booth's book Navies and Foreign Policy for someone to explore properly the role of navies in peacetime, who in his book outlined the role of navies as a triangle of sea usage. This trinity of naval tasks found its way into much of the Western Navy's maritime doctrine, and Australia is one of those. It's being referred to in our doctrine as the span of maritime tasks. The roles of maritime forces are characterised as being military, constabulary or diplomatic in nature. Now, a military role is obviously a requirement to deliberately inflict damage on opposing forces is understood and anticipated as an outcome of each activity under this role, whereas the other maritime roles do not necessarily lead to violence or purposeful destruction. Constabulary, law and order or policing function is related to the enforcement of domestic and international law and gains its legitimacy from this framework of domestic mandate or internationally agreed order. And finally, the diplomatic role contains all the activities supporting national interests, including foreign relations and national foreign policy. The use of the military role as the foundation of the triangle shows that the ability of maritime forces to undertake diplomatic and constabulary roles is dependent upon their ability to carry out the combat role, because the capability in the other two roles is largely a byproduct of the resources and skills developed firstly for warfighting. There are a number of characteristics of naval forces that enables this span of tasks to be achieved. Maritime forces can be continuously mobile, and with their own logistics and weapons, they can influence events over long distances and time periods. Australia's maritime environment and the diplomatic realities of arranging overflights of foreign states imply that in almost all cases, mobility and mass will be achieved via the sea. Perhaps not initially, but ultimately. Maritime forces also provide readiness via rapid deployment, with no immediate need for forward operating bases or prolonged diplomatic negotiations, and so they can typically be quick to be operational and in theatre. So related to response and readiness for operations is the factor of access. The Law of the Sea Convention, 1982, permits maritime forces free operations everywhere except the territorial seas and internal waters of other states. And I'll add that you can actually enter the territorial seas of another state quite happily, as long as your transit is continuous and expeditious. It is allowed under maritime law. So the ability of maritime forces to combine mobility, readiness and access in accordance with the conventions of international law and without leaving a political footprint during transit makes them a most flexible response tool, and perhaps more flexible than any other asset in the Australian Defence Force, but in all armed forces. Their ability to deploy or withdraw at will provides a rapid response to government direction and a welcome degree of ambiguity, which is very useful in many operations other than war. A withdrawal can also be achieved without the diplomatic embarrassment that can come from the images of a land headquarters, buildings or bases being abandoned. Maritime forces can simply sail away. An embarrassment or loss of face, often vital in diplomatic or politically sensitive situations, can be limited. Maritime forces are also adaptable. This relates to their flexibility and refers to the transition from peace to wartime footing quickly, often without any external signs. Their demeanour can be aggressive, passive or ambiguous, without any external sign. Now, this flexibility is unique to maritime forces, and most particularly so for warships.